So my name is Josh Boulay. I work with the Michigan State Police Hazardous Materials Training Unit. I am not a police officer, so let's get that straight, okay? I just work for the Hazardous Materials Training Center. They do all the hazmat training for the state of Michigan. Both the private sector, like yourselves with HAZWOPER trainings, both the 8-hour refresher and 40-hour initial. And then we do all first responders as well for hazardous materials technician and some specialty courses. So my background, I've been with the state police for the last 5 years. I am a firefighter paramedic full-time, been doing that for the last 20 years. And I run our county hazmat team for the last 10 years. So my position, unlike yours, is I deal with these things more on the emergency side, like you guys call 911, I show up and we take care of it from there. You guys deal with this stuff on a daily basis. So well, I thank you guys for inviting us to come out this afternoon to kind of talk to you guys about some of the gases. It's one of those things that you guys deal with on a daily basis, and we were just having a conversation a few minutes ago and about how it sneaks up on you, right? Has anybody ever really been truly exposed to any of the gases you guys deal with? Okay, a couple of you, all right. Scary thing, right? It comes out of nowhere, it can happen very quickly, and the results can be extremely deadly, right? So we're just gonna talk about some of the dangers today. If you guys got questions during my presentation, don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask. We do have to send a microphone to you so that we can get it recorded. But I'm one of those guys, if I don't ask the question right away, by the end of it, I forget what I'm supposed to be saying. My wife says it's a memory problem, so or selective listening. I'm not really sure which one it is. So like I said, if you got anything questions during this presentation, just holler out to me. I'm not going to bore you with all the gases that we're going to deal with. I'm kind of focusing on the 3 major ones that you're going to see and talk about the effects that they have and the hazards associated with them. Okay? So some of the gases that you typically see within your job, what you guys are dealing with, septic tanks and sewer systems and things like that. Obviously hydrogen sulfide, that's kind of the main one, right? Everybody knows about H2S. Then we have ammonia, methane, those are the top 3 that you're dealing with. Those are the 3 that I'm really gonna kind of dive into and talk about this afternoon. The rest of them are gonna be carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide. Dangers associated with them, yes, but they're very few. They don't produce like the other 3 do. So that's why we're gonna just kind of focus on the top 3. If you guys have questions for me after today about any of the other stuff, snag me and I'll be more than happy to talk about stuff like this. I'm a hazmat nerd, so I can sit here literally all day and talk to you guys about hazmat stuff and probably put you all to have a good night, right? You guys will have a really good nap. At least most of my classes do. So let's get into hydrogen sulfide, right? Colorless gas. You guys have all probably heard or seen about it. It's got that rotten egg smell. You guys familiar with that, I'm assuming? Probably something you guys deal with every day you're at work, right? The thing that with hydrogen sulfide that gets us is it's got 2 different qualities to it. It's flammable as well as extremely toxic, right? If inhaled. Well, usually if you're smelling rotten egg smell, what do you think you're doing? You're inhaling the gas, right? You're being exposed. If you can smell it, you're being exposed to that particular gas, right? And that comes into a lot of issues, and we'll kind of get into the specifics about that. But when you're smelling it and getting exposed to it, it doesn't take a lot of this stuff to start causing some very serious health effects, okay? And when I talk about these chemicals and their chemical physical properties, remember this is done in a lab at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect conditions, right? That's not the ideal, that's not what we work in, right? We're outside, we're in Michigan, lovely Michigan weather that goes from 30 degrees to 70 degrees in a single day, right? I come from the bottom half of the state. When I left my house, it was about 50 degrees. I come up here and it's a little bit chillier and you guys still have snow on the ground. I don't get that. I don't have that right now. So thank God for Michigan, right? So H2S, ideal H, 100 parts per million. Ideal H is immediate, dangerous to life and health. This is saying 100 parts per million over a 30-minute period, and it will kill you. Okay? So 100 parts per million is not a large number when we talk about chemical physical properties. There are obviously a lot of things out there that are much smaller. When we get into H2S, 100 parts per million doesn't take a long time for that to get affected. You guys open up a sewer cap, or if you're dealing with a septic tank and you pop that lid open for the first time, it's not conceivable to think that 100 parts per million of that product is coming at you initially, right? That's pretty significant. LEL, 4% to 46%. Okay, that's that flammable range we like to talk about in the fire world. Basically what we're saying is at 4%, this stuff will start burning and sustain burning, all the way up to 46%. When I say percentage, that's how the monitors read it, your 4 gases and 5 gases and things like that that we use in the emergency world. If you convert that to parts per million, it's 1% equals 10,000 parts per million. Okay? So yes, this stuff is flammable. Yes, it will catch on fire and it will sustain burning. But the reality is it will take 40,000 parts per million for this stuff to catch on fire. It only takes 100 parts per million to kill you. Okay? So the toxicity of this product is actually much more dangerous when it's inhaled, well before it's ever going to catch on fire and do this lovely thing where the fire department gets to show up, right? So that's the big concern. Vapor density, 1.189. Vapor density, just, is it heavier than air or is it lighter than air? Kind of gives us an idea where this stuff's going to be at. You guys work with H2S, with the sewers. It's heavier than air. It's going to sit on the ground. It's not going to really kind of come up and get it out into the atmosphere. Again, lab, right? We're talking about lab where there's no wind, there's no gusts, there's no nothing, right? The reality is here in Michigan, we have wind. It's barely over that 1. Air, as we say, is 1. It's barely over that 1. So it doesn't take much of a gust of wind to actually kick this stuff up and make it airborne. Okay? So when we get out there and we're dealing with 5, 10, 15, 20 mile an hour winds, when we're dealing with our job, this stuff will get up into the air and get into your face very quickly. Even if you're standing, you don't have to be kneeling or sticking your head down in a hole, which that just sounds like a horrible idea to me, considering I know what's in those things. You don't have to be sticking your head down into this hole for you to be exposed to these chemicals, even though it's heavier than air. It doesn't take much to get this up and going. PEL, you guys are probably familiar with PEL. It's the standard by OSHA. PEL is the permissible exposure limit. How long you can be exposed to this, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, without any adverse health effects and not in PPE, right? So your PEL for H2S, 20 parts per million, okay? That's not a very high number, right? And that's saying you can be there for 20 parts per million for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, which I don't know many people that work 40 hours a week anymore. So that's the reality, right? Its peak is 50 parts per million. Okay? If you hit 50 parts per million, you're no longer allowed to be in there without PPE, the proper PPE. And the big thing when we talk about PPE as far as H2S is concerned is mostly your respiratory. Some type of cartridge respirator or supplied air or anything like that, right? How many of you guys actually enter into tanks or things like that? A few of you? Okay. So we get into the confined space world, right? And the OSHA rules as far as confined space. This is one of those gases that we have to monitor for if we're going to do those types of events. Again, if you're going inside the tank, the concentrations inside said tank are going to be much higher, even if there's nothing left in there, which hopefully you're not going in there with products still in there. But other than that, if you're going down into these tanks, hitting 100 parts per million is not unconceivable. It is something that could very happen, even though there's nothing left in that tank. That stuff kind of lingers. It sits in there. Inside the tank, it doesn't go anywhere, right? There's no real true ventilation until you open that thing up. Odor threshold. Okay, I told you guys it smells like rotten eggs, right? Once you hit 100 parts per million, you can no longer smell it. It knocks out your olfactory sensors. Okay? So if you have that rotten egg smell and it goes away, does not necessarily mean that the product is no longer there. It could be that the product is now 100 parts per million or above, and you're standing in a very dangerous situation because that's its ideal age, right? So if you get to that point where you think that this was a huge rotten egg smell real quick, real fast, and all of a sudden it just goes away, it might have something to do with the fact that it knocked out your smell, sense of smell. Now that's going to cause a huge problem, right? You stick around in that environment to continue working and doing your job, pretty soon I'm going to be showing up to your house from the 911 side. Okay? H2S, funny enough, easy to create, and you can pretty much go to any hardware store, Myers, Walmart, anything, buy the products and make H2S. This is one of the chemicals we deal with for chemical suicides here in the state, and it's something that was very popular out in California, kind of started to pick up traction here in the east side of the country, and died off, but now it's picking back up. So it does not take very long. I've seen it firsthand, what this stuff can do and how quickly this stuff will incapacitate a human being and make them become lifeless. Okay? We're talking minutes, right? So the reality is this stuff is extremely dangerous that we're dealing with. So just some numbers to kind of give you an idea how this product behaves at its given concentration. Okay, 2 to 5 parts per million. So we're talking a very small amount. Nausea, tearing of the eyes, and a headache. Okay? All symptoms that I can pretty much live with, right? Not a big deal. But that's starting to show signs of exposure. That's saying that, hey, I am being exposed to this product, right? It's kind of like we talk about carbon monoxide poisonings. Everybody's got a CO detector in their house, hopefully, right? It's one of those things. First sign and symptom of that, nausea, headache. As things progress and you continue to be exposed to that, those symptoms start to upgrade, right? 20 parts per million. Remember, we looked at that PEL. 20 parts per million was the PEL. You can start getting fatigue, irritability, poor memory, and dizziness. If you talk to my wife, that's me on an everyday basis. So nobody would actually notice the difference if I was exposed to 20 parts per million. Okay? Although I'm not irritability, she's more irritability when it comes to me. But now 50 to 100 parts per million. When we started talking about that 50, we said peak was 50 for the PEL, the OSHA PEL, right? At 50 and above 50, up to 100 parts per million, we start really hitting hard and heavy on the respiratory tract itself. Okay? This is where we start knocking out and displacing the oxygen within our system. Now, most of you guys are pretty aware of that oxygen's kind of vital to our survival, right? We kind of need it. So when we look at H2S, this is one of the products that can displace that oxygen from your system. Keeps oxygen from getting in, attaching to your cells, and I'm not going to get into the whole particular how oxygen oxygenates the cells in the blood and all that stuff. But the reality is it's displacing it and keeping oxygen from attaching to your hemoglobin, which then causes the person to go into shock. Okay? Like I said, that 100 parts per million, you cannot smell it anymore. It's no longer in your world, not there, right? And if we're not monitoring, we don't know that it's there. And then after 30 minutes, basically, if you're exposed to 100 parts per million or higher after 30 minutes, again, perfect conditions, right? I'm talking a very young, healthy adult that takes no medications, doesn't smoke, that hasn't been eating steak for the last 30 years, all that stuff, right? After 30 minutes, suffocation happens, okay? This is one of the products out there, unfortunately, from the medical side. Now, I'll put my paramedic hat on for a minute, okay? Once you've reached to this level, right, and you've kind of expired due to it, there's really not a whole lot to do to bring you back, right? Once we've gotten to this point, and I'm not trying to scare anybody or, oh my God, this is stuff scary. But once we get to that point, the reality is bringing somebody back that has gotten to that point is extremely, extremely difficult. Our chances are like less than 10%. Okay, so it becomes very, 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 very frightening when you get to that level. Hopefully, we don't. Okay? So H2S medical side, looking at the medical side, Acute exposure at high concentration. So you lift that lid of that septic tank and that stuff pops open to your face and you're being exposed to large amounts of H2S very quickly. These are the things that are going to happen very quick. A headache, delirium. Big thing with delirium is once we kind of hit that stage of delirium, we don't really recognize anymore what we're doing or the hazards that we're being faced with, right? You get that altered mental status is typically the result of this, okay? You've ever seen anybody that's confused or highly intoxicated and they're making poor decisions? That's because they don't know any better, right? They don't have the ability to make that connection anymore that, hey, this is not a good idea, okay? So typically when you get to that stage, you stay in that environment because you don't know really what's going on. And they don't follow directions or commands. I can sit there all day long and talk to an altered mental status patient and say, hey, come with me, do this, do that. It's like trying to talk to a 2-year-old and get them to do what you want, right? You almost got to spank them to get them to wake up. Not that I want you guys hitting your employees. Disturbed equilibrium, fancy medical term for saying you get very uneasy on your feet. You get that stagger, you fall down, things like that, right? It's that individual that's been drinking all day for liquor hardcore and he's like stumbling all over. He's got that drunk lean that he's going like this as he's walking down the road, right? So that is what we're looking at. Huge problems with that. One, obviously, getting out of that environment is going to be difficult. Two, when you fall down, typically people don't fall down in the grass where there's nothing around, right? People like to fall in enclosed environments. They like to fall right next to the hole, in the hole, right? Where they continuously start to get exposed to that chemical more and more and more. Right? And then here's the big one, pulmonary edema. Again, fancy medical term for saying fluid in your lungs, right? Your lungs are supposed to be dry, right? There's supposed to be no water in there other than the surfactant that keeps it nice and loose. This here can result in 72 hours after exposure. Okay? So if you get exposed to high concentrations of H2S all of a sudden and you happen to get yourself away from that environment, as a fellow employee or boss or whatever it is you have with that individual, we need to monitor them for up to 72 hours after this incident to ensure that they don't have this. The problem with pulmonary edema, really, it's hard to get out of your lungs, okay, once you get it in there, and it's like suffocating on dry ground, right? That's basically what people say. The people that have pulmonary edema, that have had issues with pulmonary edema, will tell you it is like suffocating or drowning on dry land. Okay, so this is something that can take a long time to start showing some side effects and get exposed to this. All right, methane, CH4. Basically, when we look at chemical physical properties, right, you see CH4, H, hydrogen. Anything that has hydrogen in it means it wants to burn. Okay? This is a colorless, odorless gas, meaning we can't see it and we sure as heck can't smell it. Okay? It is highly flammable, which I'm sure most of you are pretty aware of, right? The one thing that people typically don't think of when they think of methane, is it's extremely toxic as well in high concentrations. Okay? This isn't something that you're going to lift the lid, smell, and boom, drop like H2S, right? I'm more worried about this stuff catching on fire from a simple spark, but the problem with this is if you're exposed to high concentrations, it can become toxic. Ideal H, 17,000 parts per million. Significantly much larger than the 100 parts per million of H2S, right? It's LEL, 5% to 15%. Okay? So still a fairly decent flammable range. Nothing crazy, but we do know like methane likes to burn, right? Excuse me. Vapor density 0.55, meaning this stuff's going to get up and get out, right? It's not going to linger. It's not going to hang out. It's not going to say hi to you. It really wants to get up and get away from you. Okay? It's as scared of you as you are of it, pretty much. Okay? The big thing with the methane is flash point's 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Now again, I'm talking lab perfect conditions, right? So 52 degrees is not very hard to achieve when it comes to this stuff. And I'm not saying 52 degrees outside. I'm saying the product has to be 52 degrees. Okay? The reality is doesn't take a whole lot. When we worry about this stuff, what are some big problems with methane? What are some things that could ignite methane that you guys have readily on the scene with you? Huh? Tools, trucks, right? You guys leave your trucks running because you got pumps going and things like that. That's an ignition source. That's all methane needs to get things going and make this a real big party. Okay? So when we look at those issues or those points of interest, trucks become a huge one. A lot of people forget about it. I don't know how many of you guys are from the Sawyer area, the west side of Michigan there. They had a truck explosion a few years ago, a semi-truck. Had nothing to do with methane. It was another flammable substance. Pretty cool, actually. Videos on YouTube. I highly recommend watching it. But the ignition source for that was a street light. It's pretty amazing because you see they evacuated the whole area. They let this thing do what it's going to do because it already was. You can actually, if you slow it down real well, you can actually see the vapors get up to where the street light is right above the trailer. The fire starts there, comes back to the trailer, kaboom. There wasn't nothing left of that semi-trailer when it was done, except for the little piece attached to the semi. So simple things like that is all it takes for this thing to happen, to make things go, okay? We're dealing with houses, indoor houses. Furnaces is a big one. Okay? Methane is going to get in the area when we're talking about sewer gases, right? It's going to get into that area, and it's going to get to find that where that mechanical room is, because like I know my sump area is right where my mechanical room is. My hot water tank and my furnace all sit in the same room. Well, that is a huge ignition source, especially this time of year, because I know my furnace is kicking on and off all day long. So, okay, I'm sorry. One thing I want to talk about methane. Here's where the toxicity comes in, okay? Methane does not have a toxic quality as far as like H2S. What methane does and how it kills us from inhaling it is it binds to that hemoglobin much more readily than oxygen does, and it prevents oxygen from kicking it off. So basically, once the methane gets into the hemoglobin, oxygen tries to come in, the hemoglobin's full. It's a full party bus there, and ain't nobody getting off that bus without oxygen on. Okay? So it's going to sit there, keep knocking and knocking and knocking, and nothing's going to change, and that thing's going to keep circulating. So basically what will happen is we'll start seeing the side effects of lack of oxygen within the system. Okay? That comes back to lightheaded, dizzy, fatigue, right? Headache, altered mental status. Okay? These are all symptoms when I say these things. What's the first thing that comes to mind? It's like the flu, right? You get the flu, you have all those same symptoms. This is the same thing, only it's much more worse for you, right? So typically when people get exposed to things like this, especially in high concentrations, they think, man, I just don't feel good. Well, you don't feel good because there's not oxygen circulating in the bloodstream. It's something else, okay? So that's methane. Making sure I stay on track. I don't want to keep you guys too late here. I know it's after lunch. Everybody needs to get up and get around. All right, ammonia, NH3. Colorless, highly irritating gas, sharp, suffocating odor. You guys have all smelled ammonia before. If you live in a rural area, anhydrous ammonia, something like that, you definitely know when ammonia is in the air, right? It's not a shocker that that's ammonia. When it comes to ammonia, there's a couple different qualities to it. It's extremely toxic when inhaled. Okay? That's corrosive, and it's flammable. Okay? Now, the lovely thing about anhydrous ammonia, you guys see the farmers. If you're a farmer in here, I am too, so I'm picking on all of us. You see the farm tanks going up and down the road with the green placard on it, non-flammable gas, right? There's a reason for that. Well, if my friend the farmer has to have a red placard on that, he has to have a hazmat endorsement to drive it up and down the road, right? Well, that's a little expensive for farmers, so they don't do that. Okay? But this stuff is flammable. Takes a lot, but it can get there. Ideal H, 300 parts per million. Okay? Again, we're not talking a large number here. LEL, 15% to 25%. Okay? Again, it is flammable, it will burn, but it takes in a lot of this stuff to burn. Okay? You're looking at 150,000 parts per million before this stuff is readily going to start burning and sustain burning. Okay? Dealing with septic tanks and things like that in your business, being outdoors, the reality of it ever hitting to that point is very low. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen because we don't say that in hazmat, but the reality is it is extremely low that you'll get to this. It's more so if you're in an enclosed environment. Okay? Anhydrous ammonia, if you guys don't know, is a really good refrigerant, and it's used in very large box stores, ice arenas, things like that. That's typically where we see the flammable range come into play because it's an enclosed environment. That stuff starts leaking. Next thing we know, we've got a huge problem. Okay? That stuff's also 97% pure ammonia. pH is 11.6. So again, it's a little corrosive, right? Not extremely corrosive like melt your skin, but you're gonna know it when you get on you, okay? Typically we start feeling it kind of like the creases of our arms, our armpits, things like that. That's where you're gonna start feeling that burning sensation on your skin when you're exposed. And remember, this is a gas, right? So it's not a liquid that gets on you. When you start smelling it, you're being exposed to it. So when you walk into that environment and you're smelling that suffocating odor, you're being exposed. That stuff's attaching to your skin. Clothes like this, yeah, they don't protect you. You're going to start feeling that burning pretty quickly. Okay? Vapor density, 0.59, so it's lighter than air. Wants to get up and out of there, typically. The problem with ammonia, if you look at the solubility, it's 34%. This stuff likes water, wants water, seeks out water. Okay? When we look at summertime, when we're doing a lot of our work, it's fairly humid here in the state. This is where it becomes a issue because it's going to bind with the humidity or the water within the atmosphere, and it's going to start to drop that and make it heavier than air. So now you're going to start finding some of the gas going up and some of the gas coming down to the ground. So it's going to kind of encompass a large area. All right. Its PEL is 50 parts per million TWA, time weighted average. Right. Again, not a high number when we look at the PEL. Okay. When exposed to it, inhalation causes burning of the eyes, nose, throat, and respiratory tract. Okay. We're looking at something that is going to start immediately burning you, and you're going to notice that you're available to it. Had a farmer disconnecting one of his nurse lines, and there was still product in the line. Not a lot, but just enough. It squirted in his face. He inhaled it. He had chemical burns in his nose, mouth, throat, all the way down to his lungs. He spent 2 months in a burn unit down in my area because of that. He missed a lot of farming because of a simple mistake. Okay? So this stuff can be pretty dangerous. And the problem with chemical burns internally, really not a whole lot of treatment you can do for that. And it is extremely painful to breathe, to eat, to drink, to do anything. Okay? Like I said, ingestion can cause chemical burns. If you're smelling it, you're ingesting it. That's just how it works. Yeah. Skin contact causes those chemical burns. As you start getting this on there and you start continuously being exposed to this product, it's going to continue to burn your skin. It's going to continue to cause an irritation to that area. Okay? And it's just going to continue to get worse. Treatment for this is pretty simple. Water. Lots and lots of water. They use the word copious. I've never understood what copious means. I just know it is a crap ton of water, right? No pun intended for you guys' business. So flush yourself as much as you can, get that off of you. That's the best way for this to happen. Okay? Problem with that is when the water and anhydrous mix, it also causes another caustic substance. But if you use tons of water and keep it flowing on you, minimum 15 minutes, then your likelihood of actually being severely burned from that is much lower. Okay? When we talk about the burns when it comes to this, typically we're looking at a 1st-degree burn. You guys may have heard that. It's a sunburn. Okay? If you don't get this product off you in a timely fashion, then it can start to progress and start to become that secondary burn where those blisters and things happen. Never heard of a case where it's gotten to 3rd-degree burns. You pretty much have to take a shower in the liquid portion of ammonia to do that. I highly recommend not doing that, but it is a possibility, I suppose. All right, so that's pretty much all I got for gases and things. Wanted to hit the big ones. You guys have any questions for me on those 3 or the other 3 that I had up there? Yes. So her question is for you guys is what's the difference between H2S and methane as far as the symptoms are concerned and what a patient would look like if exposed to either one of those chemicals. When we look at those chemicals, the real answer is on the medical side, there's not much of a difference. They're both similar on there. What we're going to look at and what's going to kind of help drive what product we're potentially dealing with was 1, if there was an odor, and 2, how long were they involved in that. When we looked at methane, it takes a long time to be exposed to that to actually get into the cellular level and start blocking things, where H2S does not. If we're talking very small amounts, very quick, right? So one of the questions from the paramedic side would be asking, how long was that person involved or exposed to that chemical? And that helps me kind of detect what level I'm going to. Treatment-wise for them both are going to be the same. Okay? High flow oxygen, and depending on the severity of it, we look at doing like a hyperbaric chamber or something like that. No different than what we do with like carbon monoxide poisonings and things. Does that help answer your question, hopefully?
It does, but I have one more thing.
Okay.
So you're looking at a survivor of H2S. We had to do a lot of fast, quick research within that 36-hour window when he was dying. And we had suggested this from last year when we were here, and I don't know if you listened to us, but thank you if you did, because hopefully it will save someone's life in here. And what we found out is that pumpers in particular grow and maybe you can help me explain it, grow accustomed to smelling that H2S, and they can take on.
Their tolerance becomes higher because they're susceptible to it on a daily basis.
Yes.
I was on pure oxygen, CPAP or whatever, and after 6 days, 7 days, my parts per million on pure oxygen was 1,000 parts. Centers for Disease Control said they called me and they still can't figure out that I'm alive because there's absolutely, physically no way a body could survive. And here I am. It's been 5 years.
Miracles do happen, right? Miracles do happen. Yes. So when we look at that H2S, and it goes for any of these chemicals up here that we talked about, and anything you deal with, it's like anything. Your body, as you become exposed to it daily in your work, you build up a tolerance to that level, right? We do all the training for Myers distribution centers here in the state of Michigan. They employ an NH3 tech at their facility because they have so much anhydrous ammonia there. Got to tour their facility with this guy. Very, very knowledgeable, smart man here down in Lansing. We walked into his control room, right? I immediately started feeling burning in my arms, my armpits, things like that. There was about 3 to 5 parts per million in his building at all times. He's always got that going on. He didn't even know it. To him, he didn't recognize it or know that that was inside there. Me not being exposed to it, and this is the first time, boy, I knew it right away. So yeah, you guys that work in this environment every single day will build a tolerance and be accustomed to those smells at higher levels. Good and bad, right? It might be one of the reasons why you survived this event at those higher concentrations. The bad part of that is, as you become more accustomed to this, it becomes well, I've been exposed before, but I didn't have any major issues. It's not a big deal, right? But it can be. This is one of those things, and the reason I'm here today is to just kind of preface that by, it can happen to any of us at any given time. And we're trying to eliminate this from being a possibility. You know, I teach confined space, both public and private industry, and it's amazing to me with all the technology, all the advances in OSHA regulations and things, we're still killing people in confined space by not doing simple things like air monitoring. Blows my mind. We just had 2 in the Midwest that passed away as a result of it. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to kind of illustrate what the dangers are with this. And I'm glad you're here today with us. So,
Can I push one more plug for everybody?
Sure.
There are really cheap, good H2S monitors that you literally hook to your pants, belt, whatever. And when you pop a lid, not that the person that pops a lid, but finding out how many parts per million, and if you see that, and it'll start beeping really loud, just get the heck away.
Because it has a limit on it, and when you open it up, or you walk by the truck, because the truck's a vapor, emitting a vapor off the truck will be running at 300-400 parts per million when you open the truck.
yeah, so they make, I'm not here to sell product by any means. I'm not an exhibitor. They do make, like you guys said, there's all kinds of different manufacturers out there, but they make little sensors. They're about yay big. We call it a diffuse air monitor, just product goes by it. They're about $200 to $300 depending on the type you get. And they'll last typically between 2 to 4 years. There's different ways you can buy it. And you don't have to do anything to it other than, clip it to your belt, wear it, and it'll keep track of if there's any H2S or any of those chemicals that are present, and give you an idea of how much is currently there and whether or not we need to maybe back off for a little bit, let things cool and vent before we start going in and start doing our work. So yes, those are great tools. They're out there all over the place. I highly recommend doing air monitoring. That's my forte. Not that I'm trying to sell or plug my stuff in for that. They started it. What's that? It is a great safety, absolutely. One of the things I did when I emailed when they asked me to come here and speak to you guys today was, do you guys use any PPE? Do you guys use any air monitoring? And the answer I got back was, well, no, we don't do any air monitoring. I said, okay, I won't talk about air monitoring then. But it'd be my professional opinion that I encourage you get something, if nothing else, an H2S sensor, because that's the most toxic, the most readily available in your guys' business. And it really is something that can do some serious damage fairly quickly. And I know most of you probably don't want to miss work, right? Because if you miss work, that's what money missed. So don't put yourself in that situation where you're in the hospital for 7 days on high flow O2, right? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Oh, way in the back.
Do you recommend setting the alert level for an H2S sensor? I just bought one. They're pretty affordable on Amazon.
Okay. Typically they come preset with a range in there. But if yours did not, then work within that PEL that we talked about, right? So let me get back to it. Stay within that 20, below that 20 parts per million. I think most of them are around 25 parts per million was when they start to alarm at. But that would be where I keep it at. If I stay under that 20 to 25 parts per million in an everyday working environment without PPE, then I should be okay.
Would any regular carbon respirator filter this gas out?
They do make respirators, cartridge respirators for H2S. They're specific for it. You just have to do the research when you're purchasing them to get the proper ones. My warning with cartridge respirators is this: change out the filters regularly. As they get saturated with that H2S, It doesn't take, depending on, again, concentrations. We're looking at that parts per million, how much we're being exposed to. Bless you. If you're being exposed to it on a regular basis, that cartridge gets saturated, and then before too long, that's like not wearing a cartridge at all, right? So if you go that route, which I'm not opposed of, just make sure you're changing those out on a regular basis or keeping track of how long they've been on and how long they've been used. All right, well, I thank you guys very much for having me come out. Like I said, if you guys got questions or want to pull me aside, you're more than welcome to. If you are looking for some training on hazardous materials, you're more welcome to contact the state police hazardous training site, and we come out to your facility, or you can come down to Lansing and hang out with us there. So we're more than happy to provide any service you guys are requesting for your private business. Alrighty? Thank you guys very much.